What's going on, everybody? This is Steven Field coming back at you with a brand new video. I know it's been a little while, guys. This review has been a little bit of a long time coming, but it's finally here. If you guys haven't seen my Scream 1 review yet, that review is already up on the channel. So if you haven't seen that yet, make sure you go ahead and check that out and spread the video in any way, shape, or form that you can. Let's start getting some more viewership and some likes for the channel and get it up and going. But for those of you who are here currently, finally, the review has come for the highly anticipated sequel, Scream 2. Now, Scream 2 had a lot to live up to because the first film basically kind of reinvented the horror genre. It brought ahead a new kind of form of horror filmmaking, and so Scream 2 had a lot that it had to unleash to us all, and it had to kind of live up to the legacy that the first film had established, and I think for the most part it does that. But it's kind of weird, when I rewatched it this last time, I noticed that a lot of the great things that the first film did, the second film does just as good, but also a lot of the problems that I had with the first film, the second one does just as egregious, if not worse in certain spots. But we'll kind of get into that as the review goes along. But as far as what this sequel did right, what it did right is it just reestablished that kind of meta, self-referential filmmaking that the first one was so famous for. And where it's like you had Jada Pinkett Smith and Omar Epps in the beginning as kind of, those were like your big celebrity cameos, like you had Drew Barrymore in the beginning of the first film. And it further established that whole kind of world within a world within a world premise that the Scream franchise has become famous for. I think Sidney Prescott is just as iconic of a final girl as she was in the first film. Neve Campbell, I know people will say that Neve Campbell is kind of very wooden, and it feels like she gives the same performance every single time you see her, whether it's Scream or any other film she's in. But as much as I love Jamie Lee Curtis or all these other people, I will further contest that Sidney Prescott is the greatest final girl in horror film history, because not only is she an identifiable character that you can relate to in certain spots, and it seems like at every single turn she's always kicking Ghostface ass, and she's always kind of outsmarting the killer at every single turn. And she's somebody that you want to see survive. She's not somebody that's like, oh, I hope this bitch gets it, and you don't care if she lives or not. But no, Sidney Prescott is anything but that, and I think she's really the modern standard bearer of final girls in a horror film, because she's not the classic kind of damsel in distress. And then obviously you have all the other characters returning. You have Jamie Kennedy coming back as Randy. You have Courtney Cox coming back, David Arquette. And the one return that I always look forward to, almost as much as I do Neve Campbell coming back to play Sidney Prescott, is Roger Jackson voicing Ghostface in each individual film. Because when you think of iconic names or voices in horror, you think of Robert Englund as Freddy Krueger, you think of Tony Todd with Candyman, and for most of us, we think of Brad Dourif as Chucky. This might be a little bit of an outlandish statement, but I think Roger Jackson is just as iconic of a voice in the horror genre as those names, being his voice as Ghostface. But that's just an opinion of mine, guys. Every piece of dialogue that's ever written for Ghostface, the way Roger Jackson delivers the dialogue that he's given, just everything about that for me just really screams iconic. And that's not to discredit any of those other names, because they're just as iconic. But when I think of an iconic voice in horror, I think of either Brad Dourif as Chucky, or I think of Roger Jackson's Ghostface, and that's what really pops into my brain. You bring back the original three from the first film, you bring back Roger Jackson voicing Ghostface, and it really helps make it seem like a genuine story carry-on. It's not like a Friday the 13th series where you have different characters in just about every film except for a few. And honestly, really, those are the big positives I can think of really off the top of my head. Obviously, there are some good scares, there is a good genuine suspense that's carried out through the film. especially when Dewey delivers that line to Sidney that, you know, if there's somebody trying to copy the original Woodsboro murders, then you probably already know them. And to see that realization come over Sidney's face that, you know, this is just going to be like a repeat of Woodsboro. You know, one of my closest friends is probably doing this, and it establishes another piece of identifiable characteristic that you have with Sidney Prescott, that she's really in this state where she doesn't feel like she can really trust anybody, even Dewey or Gale or Rand. He's like, she has to keep everybody at an arm's distance, and it's kind of an unfortunate storytelling piece you really take yourself along with if you identify with the character from the start. Now, if you don't, if you're just kind of one of those people who's like, it's like you think it's not fair to the other characters that she doesn't trust them, even though you could kind of understand why, then I don't know how to help you there. But I don't know, guys. You know, does the second film live up to the first film? No, because, you know, you're going to hear this a lot in my movie reviews, and you're going to hear this a lot, especially in my franchise reviews, that it's a common known fact that very rarely or ever does a sequel surpass the original. You know, it has happened, but it's a very extreme rarity, and this is obviously one of the cases where it doesn't quite get to that level, but I honestly think Scream 2 is very underrated. You know, it's kind of like, I don't know, I want to say like it's the Halloween 3 of the Scream franchise. It's the Child's Play 3 of the Scream franchise. No, it's the Bastard Child that people, it's like you have one side of the camp where people think it's either really good, it's right on par with the first one, or people think it's like several notches below, and it's a sequel that never needed to happen, which, you know, a lot of people will make that argument. And kind of going along that fact, you know, some of the negatives that I do notice with this film is that, like I harped on the first movie, where you have a lot of timing believability issues. Like when Drew Barrymore's boyfriend gets killed, and it's like the timing is just really quick and the believability just isn't there. That's one part where I think the second film does even worse with it than the first one. It's like in the scene where Sidney and her friend Hallie are driving away with the two cops, you know, they're driving themselves to safety, and, you know, Ghostface does his thing, causes complete chaos, and the second cop ends up in the front of the car. He has his gun, you know, he has the gun pointed right at Ghostface, and he has every opportunity to shoot him, but for some reason or another, he's kind of forgot, like, oh wow, I have a finger on the trigger, but he kind of forgot how to pull the fucking trigger. And, you know, that's bad enough. And then, you know, Ghostface hits the gas, the car hits the cop's sitting on the front of the hood, still has the opportunity to shoot, doesn't shoot. And you're just in there just like, wow, you know, you had 3 or 4 opportunities where this film could have been done in 5 minutes. But, you know, you kind of have to take yourself along for the rest of the ride, I guess. And then, you know, they hit a bunch of poles, the second cop ends up dead, Ghostface is knocked out in the driver's seat. And what I will contest, even though it is the best suspenseful part of the film, when Sidney and Hallie have to kind of crawl over Ghostface to get out of the front window of the car, you know, that is very suspenseful when it kind of shows like Sidney's crawling over the killer, and then the camera's like zooming, and you have like your eyes are close up to Ghostface, and at every single moment you're waiting for Ghostface to jump out at her and for further chaos to ensue, but it doesn't. And then when they both finally climb out of the car, you just do like a big like, whew. And then this is where kind of like the timing believability issue comes in, is that they crawl out of the car, they start running away, and then Sidney finally decides, you know, she pulls a Jamie Lee Curtis from Halloween H2O, where she's like, you know, I'm not running anymore, I'm going to face the killer head on, and I'm going to beat him. And then no soon after that do they turn around, she goes back to the car, and Ghostface is gone. And then when the camera pans back to Hallie, she's standing next to this like big block, and you can't see anything to the right of her except for this big block, and she's like, it's like, really, guys, you know, you're not really setting yourself up for any suspenseful payoff here. And she's like, oh, where did he go? And then, you know, Ghostface pops out, Hallie ends up dead, and it's like, well, it's like, oh, scene's over now. It's like, it doesn't have that like suspenseful, impactful punch. Nah. Nevertheless, I do think that the payoff to the reveal of the killers was pulled off as good as the first film. It was a little bit more surprising. It wasn't necessarily surprising to find out who the killers were, but it was more so surprising to find out the role that these characters actually play. Like when you find out that Debbie Saul is actually, you know, Billy Loomis's mother, and she's coming back for revenge for her son being killed. You know, I think that's more of a surprise to find out who she is rather than that she's the killer. Because there are little quirks here and there that you would think, oh, it could be her because she's playing that like that quirky, obsessive reporter who's obsessed with Gale Weathers, and she seems to be always right there after all the murders, and it does play under suspicion quite a bit. But, you know, I don't know, I was trying to think off the top of my head, you know, other positives that I could think of is that, like, you want to talk about, you know, a genuine surprise, you know, the surprise that we all felt when they actually had the balls to kill off Randy, like, in the middle of the film. It's like that was definitely one of those like emotional, impactful like gut punches, and it's like, oh, where's the movie gonna go from here? And I know you're gonna hear some people bitch that, oh, they're not happy that they took out Randy, but when you have a franchise like this, you need a death like that every now and again to really kind of raise the stakes and really make you feel like, oh, all these characters could be picked off, like nobody's safe. If that's what a horror film should do, as long as it's executed in a good way. And I definitely think Randy's death did that. Although it's kind of a little bit of a downer, only because, you know, of the characters we got in future films, you know, none of them kind of reached that love with the fans like Randy did, except for maybe, you know, Hayden Panettiere, which we'll talk about her with Scream 4. But that's really the only downside to Randy being killed, is that you never really attached with any other characters besides him, outside of, you know, our main three. Well, I think the film did as good of a job as it could to kind of further carry the legacy that the first film had. But, you know, it does fall a little beside the waist. It does the same things just as good, but it also does the same egregious things just as bad, if not worse, in some cases. But I'm definitely, and plus, you know, it makes you think that, you know, money is ultimately the importance in the world of Hollywood. Because how many times did Wes Craven say within the year of these two films being released, did he say, you know, Scream doesn't need a sequel, Scream should be its own unique legacy within the horror genre? And then, you know, I guess money ends up being more important, and it definitely hurt the morale to a degree. But I'm glad this is a franchise I'm definitely glad that we have. But all in all, guys, you know, it's a really strong sequel. It doesn't quite reach the level of the original, but, you know, when you set a bar as high as that, it's like, it's kind of like how do you top, you know, the original Halloween, or how do you top certain Friday the 13th films, etc., etc. You have to pull off almost perfect filmmaking in order to do something like that when the first film raises the bar so high. And to me, this film didn't do that quite. But I definitely think it's an underrated sequel. It's underrated in the franchise for sure. It's an underrated film in general. Because, you know, it had the balls to kill off a beloved character. It really raised the stakes. It made you wonder where the third film was going to go, even though we don't really love where the third film went, but nonetheless. So all in all, guys, I'm going to give Scream a 7.1 out of 10. Like I said, not quite as high as the original, but it did the best that it could, considering what it had to follow up. So, you know, thank you guys so much for listening. You know, I know this review took a little longer than I would have liked, but, you know, look forward to the next two reviews as well. I'm going to be reviewing Scream 3 tomorrow. You know, I'm very curious to see what my perspective on that film is going to be. And then Scream 4 will be reviewed on Saturday on Halloween, because I can't think of a better day to end a horror franchise review series on than that. And then after that, you'll see my Scream ranking go up a day or two after that. So thank you guys for being patient enough to wait for this review to come. And hopefully, you know, what I gave today was worth it. And, you know, hit that like and share button, guys. You know, subscribe, share any way you can. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, you know, whatever social media platforms you see fit. let's get the word out there. Let's get this channel up and going. Let's give everybody a different perspective on films and give something that everybody will enjoy. So thank you guys so very much for listening. Look forward to the next 2 reviews and my Scream ranking, and I'll see you guys next time.